for your kind introduction. And what I'm going to do today is give a sort of a welcome to Voyant and an overview of Voyant, which hopefully will um, tease your taste buds and prepare you for the great stuff that Augustine and his colleagues have prepared for the week ahead. First, I want to give a little bit of a background about Voyant, just so you have some sense of where it comes from. And then I'm going to just go straight into showing Voyant and running it and stuff like that. And I'll leave some room for some time for questions at the end. So, Voyant is a suite of text analysis and visualization tools. It includes a number of sort of expected tools, things that you would see in most text analysis environments, but it also includes a number of playful tools that are not really that useful, but which we've sort of developed as we were playing around in different ways. And we even now are beginning to integrate AI tools and language models and stuff like that. Voyant runs, and I think one of the reasons why it's fairly successful is it runs in the browser. You don't have to install anything. You don't have to download anything. You can, if you want to, run Voyant locally, but you don't have to. You can connect to the server that we have running. It's actually running in Quebec on the Advanced Canadian Computing Infrastructure, uh, the Digital Research Alliance. Voyant has a long history. In many ways, it goes back to Stefan Sinclair's PhD thesis, which he did in the late 1990s, where he developed his first in-browser text analysis environment as part of his PhD thesis. And I need to say that Stefan Sinclair is really the patron saint, or he's really the creative mind behind Voyant. Unfortunately, Stefan Sinclair passed away in 2020. So to some extent, his less imaginative and brilliant collaborator, myself, is now sort of in charge of Voyant and trying to keep up the good work and continue developing it. I mentioned it's in the browser. It's totally free. In fact, it's an open source project. If you want to, you can go and download the source and change it to do whatever you want. It has a multilingual interface in the sense that, in two senses. First of all, it can handle any text in any language which can be encoded in Unicode. And that includes, we can handle fairly well, not perfectly, but we can handle different directions of text. So Arabic and Hebrew go sort of right to left, whereas most texts go left to right. Where we're not good at multilingual text is things like sorting. And in the case of languages like Japanese or Chinese, we don't know how to do the tokenization. You have to use a different tool to tokenize, to split the words and put a space in between. And then Voyant will work fine. It'll display them correctly and so on. It's widely used. Voyant, there's a number of Voyant mirrors around the world that we know of, and there's all sorts of people, I'm sure, who are running mirrors for their own classes, their own universities, that they don't tell us about it. We seem to, if you can believe the Google Analytics, we seem to get something over 200,000 unique users a year from all over the world. I think the only countries, the last time I looked, that didn't seem to have anyone trying it out was uh, Mongolia. I'm trying to remember, and maybe North Korea. Finally, I'll say something as a sort of teaser to the teaser. We are extending Voyant with a notebook programming environment called Spiral. I hope to show you a little bit of this at the end. And then tomorrow morning, I'm working with Augustine to give you a sort of welcome and a little bit of an overview to Spiral. But Spiral, if you will, is a completely different interface. Today, I'm focusing on the Voyant interface. Spiral is a different interface to the same functionality. So that's my brief little background. I'm now going to switch to my browser. And this is what you see if you go to the voyant-tools.org. Now, if you look up closely, you'll see that I'm actually running it off this local computer, which for any of you who ever teach Voyant or demonstrate it, it's always a good idea to make sure that you've got it running on your own computer because sometimes what happens is all the students begin to sort of go to Voyant and start playing with it, and everything slows down and it's hard to give your demo. So I'm running this locally, but it's identical to what you get up if you go to voyanttools.org. So this is the entry screen. As I said, Voyant runs in the browser, and one of the first things you need to do in the entry screen is you need to upload a text or identify a text that Voyant will analyze. And there's a number of different ways that you can do this. First of all, you could actually paste or type some text right here. So you could take a poem or a short story or something like that, just paste it in the field, and then click the reveal button. The second thing you can do is you can type a URL. In fact, you can type a series of URLs. So, for example, you could go to Project Gutenberg, find a dialogue by Plato or some literary work that you care about, as long as it's something that is open and there's no firewall. You'd get the URL, you'd drop the URL into here, or if it comes in chapters, you might drop multiple URLs, and then Voyant will go off, try to get the text, bring it back, and index it. Thirdly, you can upload a text, and you just sort of upload it from your hard drive the way you would upload anything else. Again, you can upload one text or a bunch of texts. And then finally, we include some text that you can play around with, and that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to choose Shakespeare's plays, and I'm going to open Shakespeare's plays. So that's what we've got, what we're seeing right here in the default screen. I should mention that Shakespeare's plays have been already indexed. If you upload a similar corpus, the first time it's going to take a while for Voyant to index it. Not that long. It's, you don't have time to go off and buy a cappuccino or anything like that, but it'll still, you can scratch your head or something like that long. Which is, I should mention, one of the design principles behind Voyant is we're trying to make this very easy to use and very interactive. So you don't have to go off and spend time doing other things, or you don't get lost while you're waiting for something to happen. So this here is the default, what we call the corpus view. This is the default screen. Later on, I'll be showing you a different one. And of course, Spiral is a completely different one. But this is what you get when you just index your text. And by the way, if you upload and index your text, we cache that index on our server, and we will keep it for about a year. And there will be an ID tag. So you can, if you copy the ID tag to a notebook or something like that, you can always return to the index and not have to re-index it. And we cache it for a year as long as you don't touch it. If you don't touch it for a year, then eventually we delete it. But if you're using it, or your students are using it, or friends are using it, then we try to keep it. And we're very fortunate to have a lot of disk space from the Canadian Advanced Computing Infrastructure, so we can hold a lot of these things. So now let me sort of describe what you're looking at here. What you're seeing is a set of 5 different panels, each of which can hold 2 or 3 different tools. So, for example, here's a panel here which has the Cyrus tool or word cloud tool. Then we have in the middle here, we have the full text because we come from the humanities. Whatever we're doing, we want to be able to get back to the full text. This isn't like text analysis in other fields where the full text doesn't matter. To our mind, this is a form of sort of enhanced hypertextual, statistically informed reading. Then we have a thing that shows a sort of distribution graph of various words, and I'm going to show more about that later on. Then a keyword in context, which anyone who's worked with a concordance will know about. And then we have a panel down here that has a summary about the text you're seeing, and I'll be showing some features to that. Each one of these panels, you can actually change them. If change the size of them if you're feeling that you want more room for the word cloud, you can sort of play around with the different panels. Each one of the panels, as I mentioned, can have different tools. So right now we're looking at Cyrus. I can click here and I can get the terms tool, which is very similar to Cyrus. It's showing you high frequency words, but here it's a list, whereas Cyrus is a word cloud. And then here we've got what's called a links tool, which sort of shows you a social network graph of some of the high frequency words, and you can play around with in various ways. So each panel will have multiple tools. And then there are up here, there's a bunch of sort of settings that disappear as you roll over, but various settings that allow you to control things of whatever tool you're working in. And then down at the bottom, we have some direct controls. Because what we've loaded is a corpus of all of Shakespeare's plays, we've got a setting, a control here that allows us to decide, do we want a word cloud for the whole corpus? Or do we want it just for one particular text in the corpus? And so we could, if we wanted to, choose to just to look at one document. And we also have a little slider here that allows us to get more or less terms. Now, I'm going to go up here and show one of the extra sort of buttons that you can access, and we have these for all of the different panels and tools. One of the main ones that you might want to use is something that allows you to export. So, for example, it allows you to export a visualization. I'll show, I could, for example, say I want to export a PNG. I hit the export button. There I've got a little picture and I've got the code. I usually, to be honest, I just sort of say can copy image. I open up something like Microsoft Word, I'm writing a paper about it, and I can paste that image in. So you can easily, if it's a visualization, you can get an image and you can paste it in. So that's one type of export. But I'm going to show you another type of export, which is just by clicking the little blue URL at the top, I can open a new tab on the same tool with the same on that tool with the same text. So I still have my corpus view here in one tab, and I have a separate tab where I'm seeing this particular tool. And because the corpus view can get sort of crowded and confusing, it can be useful to have different tabs showing you greater detail on the different tools. And so now I'm looking at just the Cyrus word cloud. Typically, when I'm teaching and introducing voyant and text analysis, at this point, I ask students to think about the tool and the graphic features of the visualization. These tools are not just there to be neat and cool. You have to start understanding how you can use them and how you shouldn't use them in the interpretation of text. So I try to get students, one of the questions I ask them is, what are the graphical features that you're looking at, and which of those features do you think are based on the text, and which of those features do you think come from the programming and the designers of the tool? So what are you seeing about the text and what are you seeing about the tool? Because every tool distorts a text in some ways. If you think of a telescope, it shows things and it hides things. And you have to think the same way about these tools that they show and hide. So I usually stop and I ask, and eventually some student goes, well, I think the bigger the word, maybe the higher the frequency of it. And you're right. The larger the word, so words like king and good and shall and come, are going to be higher frequency words. In fact, if you roll over it, you can see that the word come has 2,569 instances, whereas the word young has only 478. And then some student, if there's a really bright student, they will notice, if I was actually thinking about English text, the word that should appear the most is the, and I don't see it anywhere here. There's no the on the screen. And that usually leads us to talk a second about stop word lists. And so again, if you go over and you get these controls in the upper right, there is always a control for options that give you options related to the tool you're looking at. And lo and behold, right at the top, you've got a stop words option. And you can choose to have no stop words. And if I do that, then we'll see the truly high frequency words for English. Or if for some reason it's gotten it wrong, I can choose stop word lists that might be in a different language. And for that matter, I can even, if I want to, I could edit the stop word list. If I'm working with let's say I'm working with contemporary text that's off the internet, and there's all sorts of neat, new, cool language and words that aren't in our stop word list, or even things like HTTP for, websites and so on like that. I can start adding words to the stop word list in order to prevent them from showing up in the word cloud. Just parenthetically, I should say we have a whitelist feature where you can specify exactly the words you want to show up in the word cloud. So those words and only those words. We have a very advanced feature called categories that I'm not going to talk about, and then you can control some of the graphic features, the font family and the color palette and stuff like that. So we've got some idea of the size, and then some smart student might say orientation. Some words are horizontal and some are vertical. Sorry, some are horizontal and some are vertical. And orientation is interesting because orientation does not come from the text. It's not a metrical thing. Orientation is a random walk by our algorithm. Our algorithm is trying to fit all these words together into something that's sort of cloud shaped. And so this nicely illustrates that size is metrical. It's based on a measurement of the text, if you will. And orientation, however, comes from the designers. And then we start talking about color. And color is the same way. Color comes from a palette that we've provided. And you can actually change palette. If you don't like this set of colors, we find a lot of people use the word cloud to make posters for talks and stuff like that. You can change it to a palette which will work well with your poster and stuff like that. So the palette is another feature which is really coming from the designer, not from the text. And then we start talking about centrality. And centrality is a hybrid one. So in general, the high frequency words are in the center, but because we're trying to fill this cloud, there are some lower frequency words that get sort of tucked in between the words, like the word dead and world and Richard and heaven and stuff like that. So it's a sort of mix of measurement from the text, but it's also an algorithm that is trying to pack these things into a cloud. So here you can sort of see how I try to get us the students to think about these tools and to be critical of the tools. The point of Voyant is not, that everyone should admire it and think how brilliant we are, though we like that too. But it's to get students thinking about how computers can show you texts so that you read them and study them different ways. And because of that, you need to think about what is being shown and what is not being shown. So now I'm going to move on and I'm going to show you a different tool which also deals with the high frequency words. And so I showed you the options, I showed you the export, and in the middle here we have a feature. I've got to move my thing out. A feature that allows me to, sorry, I've got to move my Zoom display out of the way. It allows me to choose a different tool to put in this space in this panel. And so I'm going to go to the terms tool. And the terms tool is in some ways it's showing the same thing that we saw in the word cloud. It's showing us the high frequency words, but now the high frequency words are in a list. And the high frequency words, we've got the count, and we've got this thing sorted by its descending from the highest frequency words to the lowest frequency words. I can change the order, so I can go in and look at, the really low frequency words, what we used to call hapax legomena, words that only appear once, which can actually be sort of interesting. I'm going to go back to sorting it by high frequency words. And so where am I going with this? And we can do some things whenever you get one of these grid tools, and there are different environments where we have these grid tools. Whenever you get these grid tools, you can actually use them in different ways. So, for example, much like a word process, like a spreadsheet, you can rearrange you can resize the columns, for example. And one of the things that's cool is you can start adding other columns. So I'm going to add a column called peakedness. Peakedness is a measurement of, it's a sort of a measurement of the distribution of the word. Is it a word that peaks, that has a sort of distinct peak, or, and I'm going to, by the way, I'm going to sort this descending, and you can see what I mean. The word Hamlet shows up a lot in the text of Hamlet and doesn't show up anywhere else. So it has a distinct peak, which can be sort of interesting to see in a corpus. Are, what are the words that are distributed and show up a lot in one place but don't show up elsewhere, if you will. And you can see in this particular case, they're all names of characters that are specific to certain plays. And then if we start going down further, eventually we get to words that are not names of characters. We could sort this descending. Uh, it hasn't changed. Sorry, ascending. And now we see words that seem to be evenly distributed, if you will. Words that don't have, that are sort of showing up all over the place. Okay, another feature we have that you can use in this terms tool. If I go up to the options, I can set a comparison corpus. In this case, I'm going to compare Shakespeare's language to Austen's language. And you'll see in a second why that's useful. And when I set that, I'm going to also go and under columns, I'm going to choose a column called comparison. And then I'm going to sort this column. And what it does is it's gonna show me the words that appear far more often in Shakespeare, the corpus I'm looking at, than appear in the comparison corpus. So this is a sort of relatively simple and useful statistical comparison that allows you to identify what language is heavily used, what words are heavily used by Shakespeare. And lo and behold, it's words like king and lord and sort of words that are more archaic in their sort of everyday language, like shall, enter. These are a set of plays, various characters enter and leave, sir, hath, come, so on and so on and so on. So you can sort of see the words that Shakespeare uses more often. And this can be very useful when you're doing your own corpus. You could have you could have a set of novels by a particular author that you're interested in, and then you could have some novels by a comparator author, somebody who's a contemporary or someone who lived before or after or something like that. And you can, instead of just looking at the high frequency words sorted by their relative frequency or by their count, you can see how the language of one author compares to another author. So that's, and there is in a little bit later, I'm going to show another way of doing the same thing within the corpus. Okay, so this is my sort of view of the uh, showing the Cyrus tool and the corpus view. I'm going to go back to the corpus view here, and I want to show a couple of the other tools. So one tool, for example, down here is a summary. And this just gives you an overview. It sort of tells you, which is of the collection of texts that we have, which is the longest. Tells us something, gives us some vocabulary density measurements and stuff like that, averages words per sentence, readability. We identify some of the high frequency words for each of the texts. These are often characters or places and stuff like that. In this panel, we also have a tool, a documents tool that gives us information about the individual documents. But this documents tool is really cool because this documents tool can drive some of the other tools. The different tools in the corpus view are loosely concatenated. To give an example from the Cyrus view, if I click on the word king, You'll notice that in the reader, it now gives me some sense of which of the texts does the word king show up the most, and it highlights the word king. So as I'm scrolling through, I can see the word king sort of highlighted. And you'll notice that in the trends tool, it will now show me the distribution of the word king over the different texts. But you might say, what if I want to see the distribution not over the different texts in the corpus? What if I want to look at the distribution in just one text? What if I want to look in Henry VI, Part 1? If I click on that in the document tool, now the trends tool is going to show me the word king, but it's going to show me the word king distributed over the different sections, if you will, of that one particular text, King Henry the Sixth. And what it does here is it divides the text into 10 segments, and that's something you can actually control the number of segments, and then it measures the count of or the relative frequency over those different segments. So what you're seeing is that these different tools are loosely concatenated. You're also seeing, which can be a little bit confusing, but if you think about it, it's something that you want. You can see how you can switch from a sort of corpus view to an individual document view, and you can sort of zoom in and out. And in fact, from if I'm interested in exploring the theme of, kings and how kings are discussed, if I click on one of these, so I'm always in Henry VI. I clicked on the fifth, sort of somewhere in the middle of the text. It will actually it'll actually orient or, if you will, jump this keyword in context display. It'll jump it so I can see the way the word king is actually used in that section of the text. And so here I have this keyword in context. If I want a little bit more context, I can click this little plus sign. It gives me a little bit more context if it's not clear. If I actually click on that, it will jump the full text, so I can actually really read the full text and how what's going on with this particular use of the word king. So you can zoom in and out, and you can study the language very closely. So you can see how the linkage, if you will, between Voyant and traditional tools of philology, the types of tools, the concording tools that, go back to the 13th century. People have been doing this sort of careful philological study of how different words are used and the language around the different words. So now I'm going to zoom in on the trends tool just to show you a couple more features in this tool, because this is one of my favorite tools. This shows distribution either over the corpus or, in this case, over the particular text. And I want to show some of the different controls that we have down here at the bottom. So first of all, we have the ability to change the type of graph that is generated. So you can, if you want, get a bar graph. It's the same data. You can get just the line graph. You can get, and this doesn't make sense when you have only one word, but if you had two or more words, you could get a stacked bar. So each of the words would sort of stack on top. And then you can get this sort of standard display, which is a combination of bar and line. The line sort of shows you the sort of flow, if you will, of the words, and the bars show you the actual sort of measurement, if you will. Now, the second thing I want to show about this is that we've got a field down here that's quite powerful. And this field shows up in a number of different tools in Voyant. It allows you to type in a word. So let's say you wanted to look at both king, and I'm going to add the wildcard asterisk. So I'm going to be looking at both the word king and variants of it. King, kings, kings possessive, and so on. And then let's compare queen. And again, I'm going to take you'll notice that queen by itself occurs 991 times. Queen with the truncation search appears 1035. And you can see the sort of difference, the sort of, if you will, royal genderedness of Shakespeare. He's obviously more interested in kings than queens. And in this particular play, you can also see that the word king shows up a lot at the beginning and at the end with some bounces in between. And the word queen only seems to really show up that much near the end. So we've got two different words that we're displaying and looking at here. You can actually type all sorts of words. And we also have, if you roll over, we have a number of different, we don't have a full, I know some of you are from computer science. We don't have a full regular expression language, but we do allow you to do things like, match an exact term, truncation search. You can match terms that start with something or terms that end with something. You can look for two terms. You can just type in multiple terms if you have a sequence of terms. You can look for two different terms, but treat them as one thing that you want to follow. So if you have a bunch of you know words that mean the same thing, happiness, happy, so glad, and so on like that. You could create a list of synonyms and then treat that as one pattern, which you track. You can search for phrases. You can search for different words within a certain number of words of each other. So you've got quite a powerful sort of search language here. It can sometimes be a bit slow, but there's a lot of power there. And this, if you're patient, it can work nicely. And again, like all the other tools, whatever you're looking at, you can export. So we could export a PNG that we could drop into a paper, and you also have a set of options. So we have the stop words that they don't make quite as much sense. Here you can control the number of segments. So we could decide that we actually want, let's say, 20 segments. We want a little bit more granularity. You can choose to see whether or not you want to see the raw frequencies, the actual count of words, or the relative frequencies. And that's a sort of important statistical difference that is a little bit more advanced, but is worth getting done understanding later on. And we also have this categories feature. Um, so now you see we're looking at over 20 segments, and it all of a sudden we begin to see that somewhere in the 18th segment it goes up, and then also in the 20th, but then it sort of drops in the 19th segment. The categories, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on the categories. I'm going to briefly show it to you, but it's actually a very powerful feature. What the categories allows you to do is to create lists of words that you want to treat as one pattern. In this case, we include by default two lists, a sort of simple version of sentiment analysis, a list called positive and a list called negative. We took a sort of linguistic set of positive and negative words, but you can create your own. You can create your own category if you want words that have to do with nobility or words that have to do with death, and whatever it is you want, you can create your own categories. And then you can use those categories when you're I'm going to reset this. You can use those categories when you're examining things. So I'm going to put at positive. Notice the little at symbol. So now I'm getting the positive words, negative. it- And so there we can see the negative. And I'm going to try again to get positive. And oh, I misspelled it. That's why I'm not getting it right. Positive. Try that again. There you go. So we can sort of see positive and negative. Now we're seeing it over the entire corpus. So you can sort of, if you will, you could sort of draw some, sort of, well, it seems as if, what is this? This is Macbeth. Macbeth seems to have more negative words than positive words. King Lear, could it be that whereas Much Ado About Nothing, maybe the comedies are a little bit more upbeat and positive than the tragedies. So you could sort of draw some, this is As You Like It, All's Well That Ends Well. So you could try to sort of draw some inferences from this. And of course, if you create your own categories, you could have a sort of category for flowers and one for insects, or categories for different emotional states, or categories for locations, and you could sort of use these to compare them. And in this view here, now let me just check where I am in my list here. Trends. Okay, so now um, I've shown you the corpus view, this view that has multiple different tools. One thing I should mention is that, we have a ton of different tools. You can actually swap any tool that's in any panel. You can actually swap with something else. So you can call in, a sort of funky tool like knots. I'm going to let you guys play with knots yourself and figure out what it is, how this thing is actually visualizing and what's going on. Uh, but suffices to say that this is a more playful visualization. It's probably not that useful for the interpretation of text, but it illustrates how all the different ways you can do that. So you can swap in any tool for any of these panels. But we have two other views, and one of them is playful, and I'm not going to deal with. But the other one of them, the scatter plot, is actually sort of important. So scatter plot is an interface that gives you access to a number of different text mining methods. Principal component analysis, which is what I'm going to focus on. We have a method, an algorithm, if you will, that I really like, correspondence analysis. It's something that was very popular in France in the 70s, I think. We have document similarity and TSNE. So we've got these different algorithms here. And I want to give you some sense of how this works. So at the moment, we are graphing 50 terms using principal component analysis. The terms are here on the side there. You can hide this sidebar if you want to, but the terms are there. You can, if there's a word that you don't think is useful, you decide that the word night is not useful. You can remove it from the display just by scrolling down. Well, I'm going to get rid of the word good. You'll notice when I click on good, it shows me where it is in the display, and I can remove it. And oh, sorry about that. Where's good and remove, which then, of course, slightly rearranges the statistics. We're seeing all these words. They've got their labels. We've got controls over the labels. I'm going to get rid of this summary there. We don't need the documents, so we're just seeing the labels to the terms. And PCA is trying to show us the clusters. So PCA is one of these sort of statistical techniques that tries to show you how words are clustering over this corpus. And so you can see that we have the outliers are interesting, the word king, Lord, Henry over there, but we've got a whole bunch of words sort of there in the center. If I click and drag, I can zoom in. I can sort of scroll up and down and sideways and that, and I can zoom in further or I can back out. And it's sort of showing me, you can see here, for example, scene, exeunt, act, men. These seem to be a bunch of words that cluster, that appear at this in the same sort of parts of the text and so on like that. We can what else can we do? We can do a number of things here. You can actually use this to drive if you're sitting there and going like, the word enter, that how is the word enter used? I mean, enter is a sort of It's going to be a sort of stage direction. So I can click that and it drops me into the full thing and it shows me the word enter graphed over there. If I wanted to, I could look at enter in the comedy of errors and in particular, and so on and so on and so on. Um, I can play with the actual words, the word away. If I hold down the control key, I can ask to see the words nearby. So I can do all sorts of stuff with the principal component analysis. I can change the number of words being shown. I can change, there's a certain amount of dimensionality. We're also trying to show clusters of words and stuff like that. Overall, the way you should think about this scatter plot display is that it's trying to show you clusters, it's trying to help you imagine and infer themes that you might then explore more carefully using the standard corpus view. So if, generally in a project, you go through a first phase where you're trying to look broadly and explore, see what things occur to you, and the scatter plot view and these different algorithms might suggest to you some interesting ideas for what you would then switch to the corpus view and follow through more carefully. So we consider this an exploratory tool. It's to help you develop ideas, but any idea you have about what's going on in the text, you're going to want to follow it carefully using the other tools and actually look closely at the language and so on. We have one other environment which is really good for exploratory text analysis. Um, we have topic modeling. So, topic modeling is a statistical technique that looks at the distribution of words and tries to find topics, where a topic is a set of words that seem to occur with a similar distribution over the corpus. And one thing to be said about topic modeling is this is probabilistic. Every time you run it, you're going to get a different set of topics with slightly different arrangements of words. So you should never think of this as something that's going to prove something about a text. Again, this is exploratory. You're getting it to sort of try to suggest, okay, well, here's, Duke, Lord, Shall, Richard, brother, sir. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. So one of the things you might want to do is you might want to increase the number of topics. You might want to increase the number of words that show up in each topic, and then run it again, and you get a slightly different set of topics. So. Um, no, enter, honor, Caesar, father, man, leave. Entering and leaving are fathers and men doing more entering and leaving. And if you click on this topic, it'll actually show you the distribution of the topic over the different texts. Likewise, if you click on a particular text, so I'm going to click on love's labor lost, it shows me which are the topics that seem the most important to this text. So you can sort of go back and forth between the distribution over the texts and the actual topics with the list of words and so on like that. And you can always just run it again. You don't like what you're getting, you can run it again. And again, I stress that this is a sort of exploratory. Um, a lot of these topics here have particular character names. Sometimes this works better when you're dealing with things like a corpus of newspaper articles or something like that. Now, I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start wrapping up. I'm going to talk a little bit more about exporting. So I'm going to go back to this standard corpus view, and I'm going to look at the export features for the trends tool. So I showed you how you can get just a straight URL, and that URL, by the way, is something that you can copy and use to go back to this tool later on. You can export a view. So you can get an HTML snippet. If you're into embedding, you can actually drop a frame into an iframe into a different web page, which would be that just that one tool, but interactive, actually live. You can get a bibliographic record reference, and in a moment I'll show you a Spidal notebook. You can export the data. It'll give you sort of tab delimited data that you can get, and I showed you exporting the visualization. So depending on the different tools that you're using, you've always got ways to sort of export this. So I'm going to export it to Spidal. And as I said, Spidal is a completely different interface, but it's really an extension of Voyant. It's different. It's not really a different tool. The underlying index and corpus is the same one. A lot of the tools are the same tools and so on like that. It's just arranged in a different way. Instead of arranged in an interactive view, with Spidal, what you're going to get is a notebook programming environment. For those of you who are computer scientists, you're probably used to this, Jupyter notebooks with Python. In this case, the programming language is, oops, sorry about that. The programming language is JavaScript because that's Voyant is built with Lucene at the back end and JavaScript at the top. And this programming language, this notebook environment has text fields and code fields. And when you run the code fields, um, it generates one of those panels that I showed you. This panel is actually interactive. You can do different things to it. You can enter a different word. Queen. Uh, what am I actually? I'm looking at Shakespeare. Let's do enter. So these are interactive panels, and you can create a notebook with as much text and interactive panels and then code that does things that Voyant doesn't do as your heart likes. So, for example, I can write up here, I can start editing the code. I want a word instead of enter. What would be another word? I want to look at shall. And I could change the document index so I could change which text we're actually looking at. I run it again, and now we have the same tool. I can copy this. I can copy this code. I can create a. I can create a new code cell, paste it in, and now I'm going to ask for the text Frankenstein. So now I've got the same. For some reason it's not doing anything here. Let's do man. Well, I'm not going to worry about it right now. But what you have is the capacity to build a sort of notebook in which you can keep track of your different experiments. You can export the code that gets you exactly what you got, and then you can annotate it and describe what it is you were thinking.